Colonel James Thompson had seen a lot in his 25 years of military service. 2 tours in Afghanistan, countless missions that tested every ounce of his courage and leadership. He'd commanded hundreds of soldiers, made split-second decisions that saved lives, and earned medals that now sat quietly in a drawer at home. But nothing in all those years had prepared him for what happened on a quiet Tuesday afternoon in suburban Virginia. It started like any other day. James was driving through Riverside Heights, an affluent neighborhood with perfectly manicured lawns and expensive cars in every driveway. He was there for work, actually. The Pentagon had asked him to visit a defense contractor's office to discuss a new communication system for military operations. It was routine stuff, the kind of meeting he'd done 100 times before. He approached a 4-way stop sign at the intersection of Maple and Oak Street. Being the careful driver he always was, James came to a complete stop. He looked left, then right, then left again. No cars coming from any direction. He pressed the gas pedal and continued through the intersection. That's when he saw the flashing lights in his rearview mirror. James felt his stomach tighten slightly, but he wasn't worried. He knew he hadn't done anything wrong. He'd been driving 5 miles under the speed limit, had stopped completely at that sign, and his registration and insurance were all current. Still, he pulled over immediately, put the car in park, and placed both hands on the steering wheel where they could be clearly seen. His military training had taught him to follow procedures, stay calm, and show respect to authority. Officer Derek Hastings walked up to the driver's side window with a swagger that immediately struck James as odd. There was something about the way the officer moved, the set of his jaw, the look in his eyes. James had learned to read people during his years in command, and something about this officer didn't sit right. "License and registration," Officer Hastings said without preamble. "No, good afternoon. No, do you know why I pulled you over?" "Just a demand." "Good afternoon, officer," James replied calmly. "May I ask why you stopped me?" "I said license and registration," Hastings repeated, his voice harder this time. James nodded slowly. "Of course. I'm going to reach into my glove compartment for my registration, and then I'll get my wallet from my pocket. I'm also an active duty Army colonel, so I'll be showing you my military ID as well." He moved slowly and deliberately, opening the glove compartment and retrieving his registration. Then he carefully pulled out his wallet, extracting both his driver's license and his military identification card. He handed all 3 documents to the officer. Officer Hastings barely glanced at them. "You ran that stop sign back there." James felt a spike of confusion. "Sir, with respect, I came to a complete stop at that intersection. I specifically remember looking both ways twice before proceeding." "Are you calling me a liar?" Hastings' voice took on an edge that made James's instincts flare with warning. "Not at all, officer. I'm simply stating what I know happened. Is it possible there was a different vehicle you meant to stop?" Hastings leaned down, peering into the car with an expression that James could only describe as hostile. "You think you're smart, don't you? Coming through our neighborhood in your fancy car, thinking you own the place." James kept his voice level, though his heart was starting to beat faster. "Officer, I'm here on official military business. I have a meeting at Anderson Defense Systems just 3 blocks from here. I'm happy to show you the appointment confirmation if that helps." "I don't care about any meeting," Hastings snapped. He looked down at the military ID in his hand, and something like contempt crossed his face. "This is probably fake anyway. You people buy these online all the time." The words hit James like a physical blow. "You people?" he repeated quietly. "Officer, that's an official military identification card. You can verify it by calling the Pentagon's verification hotline. The number is—" "Step out of the vehicle." "I'm sorry? I said step out of the vehicle now." James's mind raced. He hadn't done anything wrong. He'd been respectful, calm, and cooperative. But he could see that this situation was spiraling in a dangerous direction. "Officer, I'd like to know what grounds you have for asking me to exit my vehicle. You're being non-compliant and suspicious. Step out now or I'll add resisting arrest to your charges." "Charges? What charges?" "Officer, I haven't violated any laws." But Hastings was already reaching for his radio, calling for backup. Within minutes, 2 more patrol cars arrived. James sat in his vehicle, hands still on the wheel, watching as Officer Hastings spoke to the other officers. He couldn't hear what was being said, but he could see Hastings gesturing animatedly, pointing at James and his car. When Hastings returned, he had one hand near his service weapon. "Final warning. Exit the vehicle with your hands where I can see them. James made a decision in that moment. He could argue, assert his rights, demand to speak to a supervisor. But he'd seen too many traffic stops go wrong, seen too many videos of situations that escalated into tragedy. He had a wife at home, a 15-year-old daughter who needed her father. Pride wasn't worth dying for. I'm stepping out now, he announced clearly. My hands are empty and I'm not armed. He opened the door slowly and stepped out, keeping his movements smooth and predictable. But Officer Hastings seemed determined to escalate. Before James could even fully exit the vehicle, Hastings grabbed his arm roughly and spun him toward the car. Hands on the vehicle. Officer, I'm complying. Hands on the vehicle now. James placed his palms flat on the hood of his car. He felt Hastings kick his feet apart, spreading his stance wider. The pat-down was aggressive, almost violent. And then suddenly James felt his arm wrenched behind his back, then the other arm, and the cold metal of handcuffs clicking around his wrists. You're under arrest for running a stop sign, resisting arrest and assaulting a police officer. Assaulting? James couldn't keep the shock out of his voice. I haven't touched you. I've done everything you asked. You made aggressive movements toward me when exiting the vehicle. It was a complete lie, and they both knew it. James stood there, a decorated military officer with 25 years of service, handcuffed on the side of the road like a criminal. Other drivers slowed down to stare as they passed. He could feel their eyes on him, making assumptions, creating narratives about who he was and what he must have done. The other officers seemed uncomfortable with the situation, but none of them spoke up. That's what struck James the most, the silence. The complicity. His car was impounded. He was transported to the local police station, booked, fingerprinted, and photographed. His one phone call went to his wife, Linda, and the pain in her voice when he told her what happened was worse than anything else that day. But you didn't do anything, she kept saying. You didn't do anything wrong. I know, was all he could say in response. I know. A lawyer was arranged. Bail was posted. James was released that evening, but the damage was done. The charges were serious. Assaulting an officer could end his military career. Everything he'd worked for, every sacrifice he'd made, could disappear because of one officer's lies. In the weeks that followed, James tried to get the charges dropped. His lawyer submitted his dashcam footage, which clearly showed him stopping at the intersection and complying with every order. But the prosecutor's office moved forward anyway. Officer Hastings' report painted James as aggressive and threatening, and the legal system seemed inclined to believe the officer's word over his. So now, 3 months later, James sat in this courthouse, waiting for his day in court, waiting to defend himself against lies, waiting to see if justice would prevail or if his entire life would be destroyed by prejudice and corruption. He looked across the courtroom at Officer Hastings, who sat in full uniform looking confident and unconcerned, and James wondered, not for the first time, if wearing his country's uniform for a quarter century would mean anything at all in this room. The municipal courthouse smelled like old wood and anxiety. James sat beside his attorney, Rita Chen, a sharp woman in her 40s who'd built her reputation defending cases of police misconduct. She'd taken one look at his file and said, "This is garbage, pure garbage, and we're going to prove it." But sitting here now in this cramped courtroom with its fluorescent lights and worn carpet, James wasn't so sure. The system had a way of protecting its own, and Officer Hastings looked awfully comfortable sitting across the aisle. Hastings wore his dress uniform, all pressed and proper, with his badge polished to a shine. He'd glance over at James every few minutes with this little smirk on his face like he'd already won. Like this was all just a formality before James's life came crashing down. The gallery behind them was sparse. A few local reporters sat in the back row, probably hoping for a slow newsday story. James's wife Linda was there, gripping their daughter Nicole's hand so tight her knuckles had gone white. Nicole was 15, old enough to understand what was happening, old enough to be scared for her father. Every time James looked back at them, Linda tried to smile, but he could see the fear in her eyes. What really got to James, though, was the group of off-duty officers scattered throughout the courtroom. 5 or 6 of them, all there to support Hastings. They'd nod at him, give him encouraging looks, present a united front. It was intimidating, and James suspected that was exactly the point. Judge Patricia O'Connor entered through the side door, and everyone stood. She was a woman in her early 60s with steel gray hair pulled back in a tight bun. Her reputation preceded her. 30 years on the bench, known for being tough on crime, known for giving officers the benefit of the doubt. Rita had warned him about her. All rise. The municipal court is now in session. The Honorable Judge Patricia O'Connor presiding. They all sat back down, and James felt his stomach twist into knots. This was it. This was where his fate would be decided. The prosecutor, a younger man named David Walsh, stood to make his opening statement. He painted a picture of James as someone who thought he was above the law, someone who'd become aggressive when confronted with his violation. According to Walsh, Officer Hastings had shown remarkable restraint in a dangerous situation. James wanted to laugh at the absurdity of it. But there was nothing funny about any of this. Then Rita stood for the defense's opening statement. She was calm, measured, and devastatingly precise. She told the jury about James's 25 years of military service, his spotless record, his work at the Pentagon. She explained that he'd been in the neighborhood on official business, that he'd done nothing wrong, and that Officer Hastings had fabricated charges to cover up an unlawful stop. The evidence will show, Rita said, looking each juror in the eye, that Colonel James Thompson is the victim here, a victim of abuse of power, of false accusations, and of a system that sometimes forgets that the badge doesn't give anyone the right to lie. The prosecution called Officer Hastings as their first witness. He walked to the stand with confidence, raising his right hand and swearing to tell the truth. James wondered if the man even understood what truth meant anymore. Walsh led him through his testimony with practiced ease. Hastings described pulling James over for running a stop sign. He said James had been immediately confrontational and aggressive when asked for his license and registration. He started arguing with me right away, Hastings testified, telling me I was wrong that he hadn't run the sign. His voice was raised and he was making aggressive gestures with his hands. James shook his head slightly. Every word was a lie. What happened when you asked him to step out of the vehicle? Walsh asked. He refused at first, kept arguing, kept challenging my authority. When he finally got out, he made a sudden movement toward me. I felt threatened, so I had to restrain him for everyone's safety. And what was your impression of the defendant's state of mind? Objection, Rita said calmly. Calls for speculation. Sustained, Judge O'Connor replied. Walsh rephrased. What did you observe about the defendant's behavior? He seemed angry, agitated, like he thought the rules didn't apply to him. I've been doing this job for 8 years, and I know when someone's about to become violent. All my training and instincts told me this man was dangerous. James closed his eyes for a moment. Dangerous. A man who dedicated his life to protecting his country was being called dangerous by someone who'd lied in an official police report. The questioning continued for another 20 minutes. Hastings stuck to his story, each lie delivered with perfect confidence. When Walsh finished, he sat down looking satisfied. Now it was Rita's turn. She stood slowly, gathering her notes, and approached the witness stand. There was something about the way she moved, patient, methodical, like a chess player who already knew how the game would end. Officer Hastings, you said Colonel Thompson ran a stop sign at the intersection of Maple and Oak Street. Is that correct? Yes, ma'am. And you were positioned where exactly? I was on Oak Street, about 50 yards from the intersection. 50 yards. So roughly half a football field away? Approximately, yes. And from that distance, you were able to determine definitively that Colonel Thompson didn't come to a complete stop. I have excellent vision, ma'am. I saw what I saw. Rita nodded slowly. Were there any other vehicles at that intersection at the time? No, ma'am. So it was just Colonel Thompson's vehicle approaching a four-way stop with no other traffic? That's correct. And you're certain he didn't stop? Absolutely certain. Rita pulled out a document from her folder. Officer Hastings, I have a copy of your official police report from that day. In it, you state that the violation occurred at approximately 2:30 in the afternoon. Is that accurate? Yes, ma'am. And you also noted in your report that weather conditions were clear, visibility was good? Yes. No obstructions to your view? None. Rita walked back to the defense table and picked up a tablet. Your Honor, I'd like to enter into evidence the dashcam footage from Colonel Thompson's vehicle. Objection, Walsh said quickly. The defendant's own video isn't reliable evidence of... Overruled, Judge O'Connor interrupted. I'll allow it. Continue, Ms. Chen. Rita played the video on a large screen set up for the jury. Everyone in the courtroom watched as James's car approached the intersection. The stop sign was clearly visible. The car slowed, then came to a complete stop. You could see James's head turning left, then right, checking for traffic. Then the car proceeded through the intersection. The courtroom was silent as the video ended. Officer Hastings, Rita said quietly. Does that look like someone running a stop sign to you? Hastings shifted in his seat. Dashcam angles can be deceiving, can they? Because that footage clearly shows my client coming to a complete stop, doesn't it? I know what I saw with my own eyes. Rita let that hang in the air for a moment. Then she continued. Let's talk about what happened after you pulled him over. You said Colonel Thompson was immediately confrontational, that he raised his voice and made aggressive gestures? Yes, ma'am. The dashcam footage also has audio. Would you like to hear it? Hastings's jaw tightened. If you want to play it, Rita played the audio. James's voice came through clearly, calm, respectful, asking why he'd been stopped. There was no aggression, no raised voice, just a man trying to understand what was happening. That doesn't sound very confrontational to me, Officer Hastings. Does it to you? He was being non-compliant. How? By asking questions? By politely requesting information about why he was being stopped? By arguing with me. I didn't hear any arguing on that audio. I heard a citizen exercising his rights. But let's move on. You said in your report that Colonel Thompson made a threatening movement toward you when he exited the vehicle. What exactly did he do? He moved his arm suddenly in my direction. And you interpreted that as a threat? In my professional judgment, yes. Rita walked closer to the witness stand. Officer Hastings, were you aware that Colonel Thompson is a senior military officer with 25 years of service? He showed me some ID that claimed that. Some ID that claimed that? Do you have reason to believe his military identification was fraudulent? People fake IDs all the time. Did you attempt to verify his identification? Hastings hesitated. No, ma'am. You didn't call the Pentagon's verification hotline? I didn't feel it was necessary. Even though Colonel Thompson specifically offered to have you verify his credentials? I made a judgment call in the moment. Rita paused, letting that answer sink in with the jury. Officer Hastings, in your 8 years of law enforcement, how many times have you encountered someone with a fraudulent military ID? I don't keep count. Ballpark estimate? Maybe. I don't know, a handful. A handful in 8 years. And based on that handful of experiences, you decided that this decorated military officer was using a fake ID. Objection argumentative, Walsh said, sustained. Move on, Ms. Chen. Rita wasn't done. Officer Hastings, is it standard procedure to call backup for a routine traffic stop? When I feel the situation warrants it. And you felt this situation warranted 2 additional patrol cars? The defendant was being non-compliant. By asking questions? By arguing and resisting. But the dashcam footage shows no such behavior, does it? Hastings' face was starting to flush. That's my testimony, ma'am. Rita Chen wasn't finished with Officer Hastings. Not even close. As everyone settled back into their seats after the recess, she stood with a fresh energy that told James she was about to turn up the heat. Officer Hastings, let's talk about your police report in more detail, Rita said, holding up the document. You wrote this report on the same day as the incident, correct? Yes, ma'am. Department policy requires reports to be filed within 24 hours. And you pride yourself on accurate reporting? Absolutely. My reports are always thorough and truthful. I'm sure they are, Rita said, though her tone suggested otherwise. In this report, you state that Colonel Thompson exited his vehicle and, quote, advanced toward me in an aggressive manner. Is that correct? Yes, that's what I wrote. And by advance toward you, what exactly do you mean? Hastings shifted slightly in his seat. He got out of the car and took steps in my direction. How many steps? I don't know exactly. A few? 2 steps? 5 steps? 10 steps? Maybe 2 or 3, Rita nodded thoughtfully. 2 or 3 steps. And during these 2 or 3 steps, did he say anything threatening? His whole demeanor was threatening. That's not what I asked. Did he say anything threatening? No specific words, but yes or no, Officer Hastings. Did Colonel Thompson say anything threatening? No. Did he raise his fists? No. Did he reach for a weapon? No. Did he make any contact with you whatsoever? No, but, so let me make sure I understand. A man took 2 or 3 steps after exiting his vehicle, said nothing threatening, didn't raise his fists, didn't reach for any weapon, and didn't touch you. But you felt so threatened by this that you called for backup and arrested him for assault. Hastings' face was getting redder. You weren't there. You don't know what it's like to make split-second decisions in the field. You're right, I wasn't there, but the dashcam was, and so were traffic cameras at that intersection. Your Honor, I'd like to enter additional evidence. Walsh jumped up. Objection. We weren't notified of any additional video evidence. We obtained this footage only 3 days ago from the city's traffic management system, Rita explained. I provided copies to the prosecution as soon as we received it. Judge O'Connor looked at Walsh. Did you receive the footage? Walsh hesitated. Yes, Your Honor, but we haven't had adequate time to review. The incident happened 3 months ago. Mr. Walsh, 3 days is plenty of time to watch a video. Overruled. Proceed. Ms. Chen, Rita played the traffic camera footage. It was taken from a different angle than James's dashcam, mounted high on a pole at the intersection. The quality wasn't perfect, but it was good enough. Everyone could clearly see James's car come to a complete stop. They could see him look both ways before proceeding, and then they could see Officer Hastings's patrol car, which had been parked on a side street with no clear view of whether James had stopped or not. The courtroom murmured. Even some of the off-duty officers supporting Hastings looked uncomfortable. Officer Hastings, Rita said slowly, that traffic camera shows your patrol car was positioned behind a delivery truck parked on Oak Street. From your position, you couldn't have had a clear view of whether Colonel Thompson stopped at that intersection. Could you? I moved before making the stop. I had a clear view. The timestamp on this footage shows your vehicle didn't move until after Colonel Thompson had already passed through the intersection. How do you explain that? The timestamp could be wrong. The timestamp is automatically synced with the city's central system. Are you saying the entire city's traffic camera system has incorrect timing? Hastings didn't answer. He just stared at Rita with barely contained anger. Rita walked back to her table and picked up another document. Officer Hastings, I have your service record here. In your 8 years with the department, you've made how many traffic stops? I don't know the exact number. Approximately? Hundreds, probably. And how many of those resulted in arrests for assault on an officer? Hastings paused. A few. According to your record, 17. 17 arrests for assault on an officer during routine traffic stops. Does that seem high to you? I work in a tough area. Riverside Heights is one of the most affluent, low-crime areas in the county. Wouldn't you say 17 assault arrests from that neighborhood is unusual? Crime can happen anywhere. Rita pulled out another sheet. Of those 17 arrests, how many involved people of color? Walsh stood up. Objection, Your Honor. The racial background of previous arrests is irrelevant to this case. It speaks to a pattern of behavior, Your Honor. Rita countered. Judge O'Connor thought for a moment. I'll allow it, but be careful where you're going with this, Ms. Chen. Officer Hastings? Hastings' jaw was clenched tight. I don't keep track of race. Well, I did. All 17. All 17 of your assault arrests from traffic stops involved black or Hispanic drivers. Not one white driver. Don't you find that remarkable? Objection. Walsh was on his feet again. Your Honor, this is turning into a character assassination rather than... The witness's pattern of behavior is absolutely relevant, Rita said firmly. It establishes credibility or lack thereof. Judge O'Connor held up her hand. Both of you approach the bench. Rita and Walsh went up for a sidebar conversation that James couldn't hear. He could see the judge speaking quietly but firmly, pointing at both attorneys. When they returned to their positions, Judge O'Connor addressed the courtroom. I'm going to allow this line of questioning to continue, but Ms. Chen, keep it focused on the facts of this case. Mr. Walsh, your objection is noted for the record. Rita turned back to Hastings. Officer Hastings, in your report, you noted that Colonel Thompson was wearing casual civilian clothing. Is that correct? Yes. Jeans and a polo shirt specifically? I believe so. Did it occur to you that a man dressed that casually might not be trying to impersonate a military officer? People dress all kinds of ways. But you still doubted his military ID? I had concerns. What specifically made you doubt it? Hastings hesitated, and in that hesitation, James could see the truth trying to break through. It just didn't seem right. What didn't seem right? The ID itself, or the idea that the man in front of you could be a colonel? The whole situation. Officer Hastings, let me ask you directly. Have you ever verified a white driver's military ID by calling the Pentagon hotline? I don't remember. You don't remember, or you've never done it? I'm saying I don't keep track of those things. Rita let the silence hang there for a moment. Let's talk about what happened after the arrest. Colonel Thompson was taken to the station, booked and held for several hours. During that time, did anyone attempt to verify his military credentials? I'm not sure what the booking officers did. You're the arresting officer. It's your responsibility to ensure all information is accurate. Did you make any attempt to verify? No, ma'am. Even though one phone call could have confirmed everything? I stand by my arrest. I'm sure you do, Rita said quietly. Officer Hastings, in your report, you described Colonel Thompson as belligerent and uncooperative, but the dashcam audio clearly shows him being respectful and calm. How do you explain the discrepancy? That's my professional assessment of his behavior. Your professional assessment, based on what exactly? The tone of his voice? His word choice? His facial expression? All of the above? Or based on your preconceived notions about who he was and what he represented? Objection, Walsh called out. Withdrawn, Rita said before the judge could rule. Officer Hastings, you wrote in your report that you feared for your safety. Is that correct? Yes. Yet you approached the vehicle alone initially. You didn't call for backup until after the initial contact. If you were truly afraid, wouldn't you have called for backup before approaching? I'm trained to assess situations as they develop. So you weren't initially afraid? I became concerned when he started arguing, but we've established he wasn't arguing. He was asking questions, polite questions. So when did you actually become afraid? Hastings was sweating now, small beads forming on his forehead. When he got out of the vehicle. The vehicle you ordered him to get out of? Yes. So you gave him an order? He followed that order and you arrested him for following your order? He made a threatening movement. A movement that isn't visible on any of the video footage we've reviewed. A movement that you alone claim to have seen. A movement that somehow justified charging a decorated military officer with assault. Rita walked over to the evidence table and picked up James's military ID, now in a plastic evidence bag. Officer Hastings, do you know what this man has done for his country? Objection, relevance, Walsh said weakly. Your Honor, it speaks to the defendant's character, which the prosecution has called into question. Overruled. Answer the question, Officer Hastings. Hastings looked at the ID like it might bite him. I know he claims to be military. He doesn't claim to be military. He is military. Colonel James Thompson has served for 25 years. He's commanded soldiers in combat. He's received commendations for valor. He's dedicated his entire adult life to protecting this country, and you arrested him based on lies. Objection. Walsh was almost shouting now. Your Honor, counsel is testifying. Sustained. Ms. Chen, ask questions, don't make speeches. Rita took a breath, composing herself. Officer Hastings, do you stand by every single word in your police? The tension in the courtroom during the recess was thick enough to cut with a knife. James stood near the defense table trying to stretch out the knots in his shoulders. 25 years of military service had taught him how to stay calm under pressure, but this was different. This wasn't enemy fire or a combat situation where training kicked in automatically. This was a different kind of battle, one where the rules kept changing and the truth seemed to matter less than it should. Rita was gathering her notes, preparing for the next phase of the trial. Linda caught James's eye from the gallery and gave him a small, encouraging smile. He tried to smile back, but his face felt frozen. That's when he saw Officer Hastings get up from his seat across the aisle. The officer stood slowly, deliberately, and started walking toward the back of the courtroom where the water fountain was located. His path would take him right past the defense table, right past James. James didn't move. He just stood there, his hands resting lightly on the table, watching Hastings approach. Some instinct told him to step aside, to move out of the way, but he'd spent his entire life refusing to back down from bullies. He wasn't about to start now. As Hastings passed, he didn't even pretend to make it look accidental. His shoulder slammed into James's arm with enough force to send James stumbling backward into the table. Pain shot through his shoulder, but James caught himself, steadying his balance. Watch where you're standing, Hastings muttered, his voice low but loud enough for James to hear clearly. There was a sneer in his tone, a challenge. Every muscle in James's body tensed. His military training had prepared him for combat, taught him how to respond to physical threats. But that same training had also taught him discipline and control. He knew what Hastings was doing. The officer wanted him to react, wanted him to push back or say something aggressive. Anything that could be used against him, so James did nothing. He straightened up, squared his shoulders, and looked Hastings directly in the eye without saying a word. The message was clear. I see what you're doing, and I'm not falling for it. Hastings held his gaze for a moment, then continued walking to the water fountain. But James could feel the eyes of everyone in the courtroom on him. Rita had seen the whole thing. So had several jury members. So had the reporters in the back row and the officers in the gallery who'd come to support Hastings. Rita immediately made notes on her legal pad, documenting what had just happened. She leaned close to James. You okay? She whispered. I'm fine, James replied quietly, though his shoulder was throbbing. That was deliberate. Witnessed. We can use that. James just nodded. His heart was pounding, adrenaline flooding his system, but he kept his expression neutral. Professional. Controlled. The bailiff announced that court would resume in 2 minutes. Everyone began returning to their seats. Hastings walked back from the water fountain, that same smirk on his face, looking satisfied with himself. Judge O'Connor returned to the bench, and the bailiff called everyone to order. All rise. They sat back down, and the judge reviewed her notes. Mr. Walsh, do you have any additional witnesses? No, Your Honor. The prosecution rests. Very well. Ms. Chen, you may call your first witness. Rita stood. The defense calls Colonel James Thompson to the stand. This was it. James's chance to tell his side of the story. He stood, buttoned his suit jacket, and walked to the witness stand. The bailiff held out a Bible, and James placed his left hand on it, raising his right hand. Do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God? I do. James sat down in the witness chair, very aware of how many eyes were on him. The jury, the judge, the reporters, Linda and Nicole, and Officer Hastings sitting there with his arms crossed, looking like he was about to enjoy a show. Rita approached with a warm, encouraging expression. Colonel Thompson, can you please state your full name and occupation for the record? James Michael Thompson. I'm a colonel in the United States Army, currently stationed at the Pentagon. How long have you been in the military? 25 years. And during those 25 years, what has your service included? James took a breath. I've served in various capacities, including 2 combat tours in Afghanistan. I've commanded infantry units, worked in strategic planning, and currently serve as a senior liaison officer, coordinating between military operations and civilian defense contractors. Have you received any commendations or awards during your service? Yes, ma'am. I've received the Bronze Star, the Meritorious Service Medal, and several other unit citations and commendations. Rita nodded. Colonel Thompson, can you describe what happened on the afternoon of June 15th? James had replayed this day in his mind hundreds of times. I was driving through Riverside Heights on my way to a meeting with Anderson Defense Systems. I was there on official Pentagon business to discuss communication equipment specifications. What time was this? Approximately 2:30 in the afternoon. And what happened at the intersection of Maple and Oak? I approached a 4-way stop sign. I came to a complete stop, looked left and right to check for traffic, and then proceeded through the intersection. Are you certain you came to a complete stop? Absolutely certain. It's a habit ingrained from years of military driving protocols. I always stop completely at stop signs. What happened next? About a block later, I saw police lights in my rearview mirror. I immediately pulled over, put the car in park, and placed both hands on the steering wheel where they could be clearly seen. Why did you do that? It's what I've always been taught to do during a traffic stop. Keep your hands visible, stay calm, follow instructions. I wanted to make it as easy and safe as possible for everyone involved. What happened when Officer Hastings approached your vehicle? James glanced over at Hastings, then back at Rita. He asked for my license and registration without explaining why he'd pulled me over. When I politely asked what I'd been stopped for, he repeated his demand. I complied immediately, and I also showed him my military identification card. Why did you show him your military ID? I thought it might help establish my credibility. I wanted him to know I was in the area on official business and that I'm a person who respects authority and follows rules. How did Officer Hastings react to your military ID? He barely looked at it. Then he told me I'd run the stop sign. When I respectfully explained that I had stopped, he became hostile. He said I was calling him a liar. Were you calling him a liar? No, ma'am. I was simply stating what I knew to be true, that I had stopped at that intersection. I even offered to show him my appointment confirmation to explain why I was in the neighborhood. What did Officer Hastings say to that? James paused, remembering the moment clearly. He said he didn't care about any meeting. Then he looked at my military ID and said it was probably fake. He said, and I quote, "You people buy these online all the time." There was a murmur in the courtroom. A few jury members exchanged glances. "You people," Rita repeated. Did you understand what he meant by that? Objection, Walsh said. Calls for speculation. I'll rephrase, Rita said. Colonel Thompson, how did that comment make you feel? It made me realize that this stop had nothing to do with a traffic violation and everything to do with the color of my skin. Walsh started to object again, but Judge O'Connor waved him off. The witness may describe his interpretation of events. Overruled, Rita continued. What happened after that? Officer Hastings ordered me to exit the vehicle. I asked what grounds he had for that request, and he threatened to add resisting arrest to the charges. I could see the situation was escalating, so I decided to comply. I announced clearly that I was stepping out, that my hands were empty and that I wasn't armed. Then what? I exited the vehicle slowly and carefully. Before I could even fully step out, Officer Hastings grabbed my arm forcefully and spun me toward the car. He ordered me to put my hands on the hood. I complied immediately. The pat-down was aggressive, almost violent. Then he wrenched my arms behind my back and handcuffed me. Did you resist in any way? No, ma'am. I did exactly what he told me to do when he told me to do it. What were you charged with? Running a stop sign, resisting arrest, and assaulting a police officer. Did you assault Officer Hastings? Absolutely not. I never touched him. I never made any threatening movements. I never said anything aggressive or disrespectful. I simply asked questions about why I was being stopped, which is my right as a citizen. Rita walked over to the evidence table. Colonel Thompson, we've seen dashcam footage from your vehicle. Is that footage an accurate representation of what happened? Yes, ma'am. It shows exactly what I've described. At any point during that interaction, did you feel you were being treated fairly? No, ma'am. From the moment Officer Hastings approached my vehicle, I felt like I'd already been judged and found guilty of something I didn't do. Walsh stood for cross-examination. He approached James with a skeptical expression, like he was about to expose some great lie. Colonel Thompson, you claim you came to a complete stop at that intersection, but isn't it possible you only slowed down and thought you'd stopped? No, sir. I stopped completely. The dashcam footage confirms that. The dashcam footage shows your perspective. Officer Hastings had a different vantage point. The traffic camera footage also confirms I stopped. The courtroom had descended into controlled chaos. Judge O'Connor stood at her bench, her face flushed with barely contained anger. Officer Hastings approached slowly. His earlier confidence completely evaporated. The jury members were whispering to each other, some looking shocked, others angry. Rita was furiously taking notes, documenting every single detail of what had just happened. James remained at the witness stand, his hands gripped tightly on the armrests of the chair. He'd heard worse in his life, much worse, unfortunately. But hearing it here in a court of law from a police officer who'd arrested him based on lies felt like a violation on a completely different level. Officer Hastings, Judge O'Connor's voice was dangerously quiet. Did you just use a racial slur in my courtroom? Your Honor, Yes or no, officer? Hastings looked around desperately as if searching for an escape route. It was taken out of context. Context? Judge O'Connor's voice rose slightly. There is no context in which that language is acceptable in a court of law. There is no context in which a law enforcement officer should ever use that word. Walsh stood up, trying to salvage something from this disaster. Your Honor, perhaps if we could take a moment. Sit down, Mr. Walsh. The judge didn't even look at him. Ms. Chen, I assume you want this entered into the record? Absolutely, Your Honor. The defense formally requests that Officer Hastings' comment be documented in the official court transcript and that the court consider its relevance to his credibility as a witness and the underlying motivation for the arrest of Colonel Thompson. So noted. Officer Hastings, I am holding you in contempt of court. You will pay a fine of $1,000. and I am recommending to your department that you face immediate disciplinary action. Furthermore, that's when it happened. The heavy wooden doors at the back of the courtroom swung open with a force that made several people jump. Everyone turned to look, including Judge O'Connor, whose sentence was cut off mid-word. A figure in military dress uniform stood in the doorway. Not just any uniform. This was the formal service dress with all the decorations and insignia that signified high rank. The uniform was impeccably pressed, the shoes polished to a mirror shine, and on the shoulders sat the stars of a 3-star lieutenant general. The man wearing this uniform was in his late 50s, tall and imposing, with close-cropped gray hair and a bearing that commanded instant respect. He was African American, his dark skin contrasting sharply with the pristine uniform. Behind him stood a younger officer, clearly an aide, carrying a briefcase and tablet. The general's eyes swept across the courtroom with the kind of analytical precision that came from decades of military leadership. He took in the scene. James at the witness stand, Officer Hastings at the bench looking panicked, the judge frozen in mid-sentence, the stunned faces of everyone in the gallery. For a moment, nobody moved. Nobody spoke. The only sound was the gentle click of the door closing behind the aide. Then the general began walking down the center aisle. His footsteps echoed in the silent courtroom, each step measured and purposeful. He didn't hurry, didn't hesitate. He walked with the confidence of someone who'd commanded thousands of soldiers and made decisions that affected national security. As he passed Officer Hastings' colleagues in the gallery, James saw them straighten in their seats instinctively. Military bearing had that effect on people, even civilian law enforcement. It demanded respect without asking for it. The general's gaze found James and something flickered in his eyes. Recognition? Acknowledgement? James couldn't quite tell, but there was definitely a connection there, something that suggested this wasn't a random visit. Then the general's eyes moved to Officer Hastings, who had turned to see who'd entered. The look the general gave him was one of unmistakable disapproval, the kind of look a commanding officer gives a soldier who's dishonored their uniform. Hastings actually took a step back. Judge O'Connor, recovering from her surprise, straightened her robes. "Can I help you?" Her tone was respectful but firm, clearly unsure whether to be annoyed at the interruption or curious about why a 3-star general had just walked into her courtroom. The general approached the bar, the wooden railing that separated the gallery from the working area of the court. He stopped there and addressed the judge with perfect military courtesy. "Your Honor, I apologize for this unexpected interruption. My name is Lieutenant General Raymond Foster, United States Army. I'm with the Pentagon's Personnel and Readiness Office. I have pertinent information regarding this case that I believe the court needs to hear." His voice was deep and authoritative, the kind of voice that had given orders to entire divisions. But he wasn't being aggressive or demanding. He was being respectful of the court's authority while making it clear that what he had to say was important. Judge O'Connor studied him for a moment. "General Foster, this is highly irregular. I understand, Your Honor. And under normal circumstances, I would never presume to interrupt court proceedings. However, this case involves serious allegations against one of my officers, and I've recently become aware of evidence that directly contradicts the charges." Rita was already on her feet. "Your Honor, the defense would very much like to hear what General Foster has to say." Walsh looked like he wanted to object but couldn't quite figure out the grounds. "Your Honor, we weren't notified that the defense planned to call a military witness." "We didn't plan to, Mr. Walsh," Rita replied, "because we didn't know General Foster was coming. But I'm certainly not going to turn away evidence that supports my client's innocence." General Foster spoke again. "Your Honor, I only learned about this case 2 days ago. It came to my attention through routine security reviews. When I saw that Colonel Thompson, a senior officer working on classified projects, had been arrested, I immediately launched an inquiry. What I found was extremely disturbing." Judge O'Connor considered for a long moment. James could see her weighing protocol against the potential importance of what the general might say. Finally, she nodded. "Very well. General Foster, you may approach." "Bailiff, swear in the general as a witness." The bailiff brought over the Bible. General Foster placed his left hand on it and raised his right hand, the same hand that had probably taken dozens of oaths over his military career. "Do you swear to tell the truth?" The whole truth and nothing but the truth. So help you God? I do. The words were firm and clear. General Foster took the witness stand. James had been excused and returned to the defense table, where he sat next to Rita, his mind racing. He didn't personally know General Foster, at least not that he remembered. But the general had recognized him, had known his name, had come here specifically because of this case. Rita approached the witness stand. General Foster, thank you for coming. Can you please explain for the court how you became aware of Colonel Thompson's situation? General Foster nodded. As I mentioned, I work in personnel and readiness at the Pentagon. Part of my responsibility involves security clearances and the review of any incidents involving officers working on sensitive projects. Colonel Thompson is assigned to a classified program involving military-civilian communications coordination. When officers with security clearances are arrested, it triggers an automatic review process. And what did that review reveal? It revealed that Colonel Thompson had been charged with serious offenses, running a stop sign, resisting arrest, and assault on a police officer. Those are charges that, if proven, could result in the loss of his security clearance and effectively end his military career. So you looked into the details? I did more than that. I had my staff pull every piece of available evidence. We obtained the police report, reviewed the dashcam footage from Colonel Thompson's vehicle, and also acquired something that apparently the local police department failed to obtain. Rita's eyes lit up. And what was that? Additional traffic camera footage from that intersection. Not just the one camera. We found 3 different angles covering that area. We also pulled GPS data from Colonel Thompson's Pentagon-issued phone, which timestamps his exact location at the moment Officer Hastings claims he ran the stop sign. The courtroom was completely silent now, everyone hanging on the general's words. What did this evidence show? Rita asked. It showed conclusively that Colonel Thompson came to a complete stop at that intersection. The GPS data shows his vehicle at 0 miles per hour for approximately 3 seconds. The traffic camera footage from multiple angles confirms this. There is absolutely no doubt that he stopped. James felt his chest tighten with emotion. Validation. Finally, validation from someone the system couldn't easily dismiss or ignore. General Foster continued, but that's not all we found. The traffic camera footage also shows Officer Hastings' patrol car. His vehicle was positioned behind a delivery truck with no clear line of sight to the intersection. He couldn't have seen whether Colonel Thompson stopped or not because his view was completely blocked. Walsh stood up. Your Honor, I object to this entire testimony. General Foster isn't an expert in traffic law or accident reconstruction. His opinions about what the footage shows are, Mr. Walsh, General Foster interrupted calmly, I'm not offering opinions. I'm presenting documented evidence that your office should have obtained during the initial investigation. The 30-minute recess felt like an eternity. James sat in a small conference room adjacent to the courtroom with Rita and General Foster's aide, who had opened the briefcase to reveal stacks of documents, printed photographs, and several USB drives containing video footage. This is everything we collected over the past 48 hours, the aide explained. He was a captain named Bradley Henderson, efficient and professional. Traffic camera footage from 3 different angles, GPS data from Colonel Thompson's phone, time-stamped records from the Anderson Defense Systems security desk showing his scheduled appointment, and a complete breakdown of the sightlines from Officer Hastings' position. Rita examined each document carefully, her experienced lawyer's eye catching every detail. This is incredible. How did you pull all this together so quickly? General Foster, who joined them after speaking briefly with Judge O'Connor's clerk, answered. When something involves one of our officers and potential security clearance issues, we move fast. We have resources and connections that allowed us to obtain this evidence within hours. The question is why the local police department and prosecutor's office didn't obtain any of this during their initial investigation. Because they didn't want to, Rita said bluntly. They had Officer Hastings' word and that was enough for them. They didn't dig deeper because they weren't looking for truth. They were looking for a conviction. James sat quietly watching them work. Part of him still couldn't quite believe this was happening. Hours ago, he'd been facing the possibility of losing everything. His career, his reputation, his freedom. Now a 3-star general had arrived with evidence that could completely vindicate him. Colonel Thompson, General Foster said, turning to face him. I need you to understand something. What happens in that courtroom over the next hour is going to change your life, but it's also going to have ripples far beyond just you. Sir, this case is going to be studied. It's going to be used in training seminars about civil-military relations, about racial profiling, about the importance of thorough investigations. Your name is going to be attached to discussions about police accountability and military dignity. Are you prepared for that? James thought about it for a moment. He thought about his daughter Nicole sitting in that courtroom, watching her father fight for his honor. He thought about every other black officer who'd faced similar situations, who'd been stopped for driving while black, who'd been presumed guilty before any evidence was heard. Yes, sir, James said firmly. If what happened to me can help prevent it from happening to someone else, then it's worth it. General Foster nodded with approval. Good man. That's exactly what I hoped you'd say. A knock on the door signaled that the recess was ending. They gathered the documents and headed back into the courtroom. The atmosphere had shifted noticeably. The gallery was more crowded now. Word had apparently spread that something significant was happening, and more reporters had arrived. The off-duty officers who'd been supporting Hastings were gone, their seats now filled with curious onlookers. Officer Hastings sat at the prosecution table looking pale and defeated. His swagger was completely gone. Walsh was speaking to him in hushed, urgent tones, probably trying to figure out some way to salvage the case. Judge O'Connor returned to the bench, and everyone rose. When they sat back down, the judge addressed the courtroom. I've reviewed the evidence that General Foster has provided. I've also had my clerk verify the authenticity of the documents and footage. Everything appears to be legitimate and properly obtained. She paused, looking at Walsh. Mr. Walsh, does the prosecution wish to review this evidence? Walsh stood slowly. Your Honor, we'd need time to analyze. You've had 3 months to analyze evidence in this case. Mr. Walsh, 3 months during which you apparently made no effort to obtain traffic camera footage, GPS data, or any corroborating evidence beyond Officer Hastings' word. I'm going to give you 30 seconds to look at what General Foster has brought, and then we're going to proceed. It was clear Judge O'Connor's patience had run out. Walsh approached the evidence table, where Captain Henderson had set up a laptop showing the traffic camera footage. Walsh watched for about 20 seconds, his face growing paler with each frame. The footage was damning. It showed exactly what General Foster had described. James's complete stop. The blocked sightline from Hastings' position. Everything. Walsh returned to his seat without saying anything. That told James everything he needed to know. Ms. Chen, Judge O'Connor said, I assume you'd like this evidence formally entered into the record? Yes, Your Honor, all of it. So ordered. The judge turned to the jury. Ladies and gentlemen, you're about to see additional evidence that has just been brought to the court's attention. I want you to review it carefully. Captain Henderson set up the presentation on a large screen visible to everyone in the courtroom. He started with the GPS data, showing James's phone location at the exact time of the alleged violation. The data clearly showed the phone moving at 23 miles per hour, then decelerating to 0, remaining at 0 for 3 seconds, then accelerating again. 0 miles per hour, General Foster narrated from his seat. For 3 full seconds. That's not a rolling stop. That's a complete stop. Next came the traffic camera footage. The first angle showed James's car approaching the intersection from the front. You could see the car slow down, come to a complete stop, wait, then proceed. The second angle was from the side, showing the 4-way intersection. Again, James's car came to a complete stop. No other vehicles were at the intersection. The stop was clear and undeniable. The third angle was the most devastating for the prosecution. It showed Officer Hastings' patrol car parked on a side street, with a large delivery truck blocking the view between his position and the intersection. There was no way, absolutely no way, he could have seen whether James stopped or not. The courtroom was silent as the footage played. James watched the jury members' faces. Some looked angry. Others looked disappointed. A few looked like they were embarrassed they'd even considered convicting James based on Officer Hastings' testimony. Captain Henderson brought up the next piece of evidence. A 3D diagram showing the sightlines from Hastings' position. It used the traffic camera data to reconstruct the exact positions of both vehicles, the delivery truck and nearby buildings. The conclusion was inescapable. Officer Hastings' view was completely obstructed. Your Honor, Rita stood up. I'd like to recall Officer Hastings to the stand. Walsh jumped up. Objection. The prosecution has already rested its case. Given this new evidence, the defense has the right to further cross-examine the prosecution's witness, Rita countered. Judge O'Connor didn't hesitate. Sustained. Officer Hastings, retake the stand. Hastings walked to the witness stand like a man heading to his execution. He sat down heavily, avoiding eye contact with everyone in the courtroom. The bailiff reminded him he was still under oath. Rita approached with the evidence displayed on the screen behind her. Officer Hastings, you testified under oath that you saw Colonel Thompson run a stop sign. Do you stand by that testimony? Hastings was silent for a long moment. Yes. Even though the GPS data shows his vehicle at 0 miles per hour for 3 seconds? GPS can be unreliable. Even though traffic camera footage from 3 different angles shows him coming to a complete stop. Cameras can be deceiving. Rita's voice got harder. Even though a 3D reconstruction of the scene proves conclusively that your view was completely blocked by a delivery truck. Hastings didn't answer. He just stared at the floor. Officer Hastings, look at that screen. Rita pointed. Look at the evidence. Your patrol car is here. The delivery truck is here. The intersection is here. You couldn't have seen that intersection from your position. You couldn't have seen whether Colonel Thompson stopped or not. So tell this court the truth. Did you actually see Colonel Thompson run that stop sign, or did you make it up? Objection. Walsh was on his feet. Your Honor, counsel is badgering the witness. Overruled. The witness will answer the question. Hastings looked up, and for the first time James saw something like shame in his eyes. Not remorse exactly, but shame at being caught. I believed he ran the sign, Hastings said quietly. That's not what I asked. Did you see him run the sign? No, not directly. The courtroom erupted. Judge O'Connor had to bang her gavel several times to restore order. Rita pressed on. So you pulled over Colonel Thompson for a violation you didn't actually witness? I had reason to believe, yes or no. Did you witness the alleged violation? No. And when Colonel Thompson questioned the stop, you became hostile. Why? Hastings didn't answer. Was it because he was right? Because you knew you didn't have legitimate grounds for the stop? Still no answer. And when he showed you his military ID, you called it fake. Why would you say that? I don't know. You said you people buy these online all the time. What did you mean by you people? Objection. Walsh tried again, overruled. Answer the question, Officer Hastings. I didn't mean anything by it. You didn't mean anything by it, Rita repeated slowly. Just like you didn't mean anything by the racial slur you used in this courtroom less than an hour ago? Hastings flinched like he'd been slapped. Officer Hastings, let me ask you directly. Did you pull over, Colonel? The applause died down as Judge O'Connor's stern voice cut through the courtroom. Officer Hastings, who had started to stand, froze halfway out of his chair. The look on his face was one of pure dread. He knew what was coming. Officer Hastings, sit back down, the judge ordered. I'm not done with you. Hastings slowly lowered himself back into the witness chair. The confidence he'd shown at the start of this trial was completely gone now. In its place was a man who realized his entire world was about to collapse around him. Judge O'Connor removed her glasses and set them on the bench in front of her. When she spoke, her voice was measured but filled with an anger that had been building throughout the entire proceedings. In 30 years on this bench, I have seen a lot of things. I've seen good cops and bad cops. I've seen honest mistakes and deliberate lies. But what I witnessed here today is something that shakes my faith in the justice system itself. The courtroom was absolutely silent. Even the reporters had stopped typing, afraid that the sound of their keyboards might interrupt this moment. Officer Hastings, you stood in this courtroom, placed your hand on the Bible, swore an oath to tell the truth, and then proceeded to lie repeatedly. You lied about witnessing a traffic violation. You lied about Colonel Thompson's behavior. You lied about feeling threatened. You fabricated probable cause for a stop. You manufactured charges, and you attempted to destroy a good man's life and career. Hastings stared at the floor, his hands clenched together in his lap. Worse than that, the judge continued. You used your position of authority, a position that requires public trust, to act on personal prejudices. Your conduct, both on the day of the arrest and here in this courtroom, has been a disgrace to law enforcement officers everywhere who do their jobs with integrity and honor. Judge O'Connor picked up a document from her desk. I'm entering several orders today. First, I am finding you in contempt of court for your use of racial slurs in this courtroom. That's a fine of $1,000, which I mentioned earlier, but I'm also adding 30 days in county jail, suspended pending good behavior. Hastings' head jerked up. Your Honor, I'm not finished. Second, I am referring this matter to the District Attorney's Office for criminal investigation. The charges I recommend they consider include filing a false police report, perjury, and deprivation of rights under color of law. Those are federal civil rights violations, Officer Hastings, which means the FBI will likely be involved. Walsh stood up weakly. Your Honor, my client, Mr. Walsh, Officer Hastings is your witness, not your client. And if you're smart, you'll advise your office to cooperate fully with any investigation rather than trying to protect him. The judge turned her attention back to Hastings. Third, I am ordering the court clerk to provide a complete transcript of these proceedings to the State Police Oversight Board, the County Police Chief, and the Department of Justice Civil Rights Division. Your conduct here warrants the highest level of scrutiny. James watched Hastings' face drain of color. The officer's career wasn't just in jeopardy, it was over. Everyone in that courtroom knew it. Furthermore, Judge O'Connor continued, I am recommending that the police department conduct a comprehensive review of all arrests made by Officer Hastings during his tenure. If this is how you conducted yourself in this case, I have serious concerns about the validity of other arrests you've made. That hit Hastings hard. James could see it in the way his shoulders slumped, the way his hands started shaking. Every case he'd ever worked, every arrest he'd ever made was now going to be questioned. People he'd put in jail might be released. Evidence he'd gathered might be thrown out. His entire career was being dismantled in real time. Finally, the judge said, and her voice got even harder. I want to address what you said in this courtroom earlier. That word you used, that disgusting, hateful word. It revealed exactly who you are and what motivated your actions. You didn't arrest Colonel Thompson because he violated the law. You arrested him because of the color of his skin. That's not law enforcement. That's oppression, and it has no place in my courtroom or in any corner of our justice system. She paused, letting those words sink in. I am hereby barring you from ever testifying in this court again. If any case requires your testimony, it will need to be heard in a different venue, and the defense will be notified of your history here so they can properly challenge your credibility. Judge O'Connor put her glasses back on and looked at the packed courtroom. Let me be clear to everyone present. What happened here today is not an isolated incident. This kind of abuse happens far too often, in too many communities, to too many people who don't have the resources or connections that Colonel Thompson had. Most victims of this kind of misconduct never get their day in court. They certainly don't get a 3-star general showing up with evidence to prove their innocence. She looked directly at the reporters in the back row. I hope you'll report this story accurately and completely. Not just the sensational parts, but the systemic failures that allowed it to happen. The prosecutor's office that didn't do basic investigative work. The police department that didn't properly train or supervise its officers. The culture that made Officer Hastings think he could get away with this. Judge O'Connor turned back to Hastings one final time. You're dismissed from the witness stand, but you are not dismissed from accountability. The consequences of your actions are just beginning. Court is adjourned. The gavel came down with a sharp crack that seemed to echo through the entire building. Hastings stood on shaky legs and walked back to the prosecution table. Walsh wouldn't even look at him. Whatever professional relationship they'd had was clearly over. Hastings gathered his things and headed toward the exit, but he had to walk past James to get there. For just a moment, their eyes met. James saw no remorse there, no apology, no recognition of wrongdoing, just anger and resentment. Hastings was sorry he got caught, but he wasn't sorry for what he'd done. That told James everything he needed to know about the man. As Hastings reached the courtroom doors, he was met by 2 officers from Internal Affairs who'd apparently been waiting outside. James couldn't hear what they said, but he saw them escort Hastings away, one on each side. The badge and gun would be surrendered within the hour, James knew. The administrative leave would be announced by end of day. Linda rushed forward and threw her arms around James, holding him so tight he could barely breathe. Nicole joined them, and for a moment the 3 of them just stood there in the middle of the courtroom holding each other. It's over, Linda whispered, her face pressed against his shoulder. It's finally over. We knew you didn't do it, Nicole said, her voice muffled. We always knew. James felt tears prick his eyes, but he held them back. He'd stayed strong through this entire ordeal, and he needed to stay strong just a little longer. There would be time to process everything later, time to deal with the emotional aftermath. Right now, he just wanted to hold his family. Rita Chen approached with a satisfied smile. Well, that went better than I expected. Much better. James released his wife and daughter and shook Rita's hand. Thank you. For everything. For believing me, for fighting for me. That's my job, Rita interrupted gently. But this case was different. This one mattered. And I'm glad we could get you justice. General Foster walked over, his aide following behind. Colonel Thompson, do you have a moment? Of course, sir. They stepped aside to a quieter corner of the courtroom. General Foster's expression was serious but not unkind. What happens next is up to you. You can return to your duties as if nothing happened, or you can take some time. I've already authorized 30 days of leave if you want it. I appreciate that, sir, but I think I'd rather get back to work. Sitting around thinking about this won't help anyone. The general nodded approvingly. That's what I thought you'd say. But I want you to know, you're going to be approached by a lot of people about this case. Media, advocacy groups, other officers who've faced similar situations. It can be overwhelming. I understand, sir. I'm assigning Captain Henderson to handle media requests for you. He'll filter what comes through and help you decide what you want to respond to. You don't have to talk to anyone you don't want to. James glanced at the reporters who were already trying to push their way forward, held back only by the bailiff. I think I might want to make a statement. Not today, but soon. If my story can help change things, I want to do that. Good man, General Foster said. He extended his hand again. I meant what I said earlier. We stand together. If you need anything, and I mean anything, you contact me directly. You have my word on that. Thank you, sir. I won't forget this. As General Foster left with his aide, Walsh approached hesitantly. The prosecutor looked like he'd aged 10 years in the past few hours. Colonel Thompson, he said quietly, I owe you an apology. James waited, saying nothing. Walsh continued, clearly uncomfortable. I should have investigated more thoroughly. I should have questioned Officer Hastings' account. I should have obtained that traffic camera footage myself. I didn't do my job, and because of that, you and your family suffered for 3 months. I'm sorry. It wasn't enough, could never be enough, but James appreciated the attempt. Mr. Walsh, I accept your apology, but I hope you'll learn from this. 3 weeks had passed since the trial ended, but for James it felt both like yesterday and a lifetime ago. He stood in his Pentagon office, looking out the window at the Washington, D.C. skyline, thinking about how much had changed in such a short time. The media coverage had been intense. The story had everything reporters loved. A decorated military officer, false charges, racial profiling, a dramatic courtroom confrontation, and a powerful general arriving with evidence at just the right moment. It had been featured on national news, written about in major newspapers, and discussed endlessly on social media. James had given exactly one interview, carefully coordinated through Captain Henderson. He'd chosen to speak with a respected journalist known for thoughtful reporting rather than sensationalism. In that interview, he'd talked about his experience, but he'd also made sure to emphasize the broader issues, the countless others who faced similar situations without the resources to fight back. The response had been overwhelming. His office had received hundreds of letters and emails from people sharing their own stories of police misconduct, racial profiling, and unjust treatment. Some were from fellow military personnel. Others were from ordinary citizens who'd been through similar ordeals. Each story was a reminder that what happened to him wasn't unique. It was part of a much larger problem. A knock on his door pulled James from his thoughts. Come in. General Foster entered, and James immediately stood at attention. At ease, Colonel, Foster said with a slight smile. This isn't a formal visit. What can I do for you, sir? Foster closed the door and took a seat across from James's desk. I wanted to check in on you, see how you're adjusting to everything. I'm fine, sir. Ready to get back to normal work? Normal, Foster repeated, almost amused. I'm not sure your life is going to be normal for quite a while, Colonel. He wasn't wrong. Just yesterday, James had been recognized in a coffee shop by someone who'd seen his interview. The week before, he'd been asked to speak at a law enforcement training conference about civil-military relations. The requests kept coming, Advocacy groups, universities, police reform organizations, all wanting him to share his story. "Sir, can I ask you something?" James said. "That training exercise 15 years ago when we first met. Why did you remember that?" Foster leaned back in his chair. "Because it revealed character. You could have blamed that sergeant for the mistake. It would have been easy and technically accurate. But you didn't. You took responsibility, protected your soldier, and handled the situation with integrity. That told me everything I needed to know about the kind of officer you were. I barely remember the incident, sir. That's because for you, it was just another day of doing the right thing. But I've been in this army long enough to know that true character shows in the small moments, not just the big ones." Foster paused. "That's why when I saw your name on that security review, I knew immediately something was wrong. An officer with your record doesn't suddenly assault a police officer over a traffic stop. Thank you for believing in me, sir." "Don't thank me. I did what any good leader should do. I looked at the facts and made a decision based on evidence and character assessment." Foster pulled a folder from his briefcase. "Now let's talk about what comes next." James felt a slight tension. "Sir, relax, it's nothing bad. Actually, it's an opportunity. The Pentagon wants to create a new position, a special advisor on civil-military relations with a focus on community policing and military personnel interactions with local law enforcement. They want you for the position." James was stunned. "Me? You have the experience, the credibility, and unfortunately, first-hand knowledge of what can go wrong. You'd work with police departments across the country, develop training programs, create best practices for interactions involving military personnel. It's important work, Colonel. What about my current assignment? You'd be reassigned. It's a promotion, actually. You'd be working directly under my office with expanded responsibilities." Foster set the folder on James's desk. "Think about it. No pressure. But I believe you could make a real difference in this role." After Foster left, James sat alone with the folder unopened on his desk. A new assignment. A chance to turn his worst experience into something meaningful. It was tempting, but it also felt heavy, like taking on the weight of everyone else's stories along with his own. His phone buzzed with a text from Linda. "Don't forget, Nicole's school assembly is tonight. She wants you there." James smiled. Nicole had become something of a young activist since the trial. She'd written an essay about justice and her father's experience that had won a statewide competition. Tonight she'd be reading it at a school assembly. She'd asked him to attend in his uniform. That evening, James sat in the school auditorium in his dress uniform, Linda beside him. The room was packed with students, parents, and teachers. When Nicole's name was called, she walked to the podium with confidence that reminded him so much of her mother. "My father is a hero," Nicole began, her voice clear and strong. "Not because he fought in wars, though he did. Not because he has medals, though he does. He's a hero because when he was treated unfairly, when he was lied about and accused of things he didn't do, he didn't become bitter. He didn't give up on the system. Instead, he fought for justice, and now he's using his experience to help others." James felt his throat tighten with emotion. "What happened to my dad happens to a lot of people," Nicole continued. "People who don't have generals to help them. People who don't have good lawyers or dashcam footage. People who give up because the system seems too big to fight. My dad taught me that we can't give up. We have to keep fighting for what's right even when it's hard. Especially when it's hard." She looked directly at James. "He also taught me that wearing a uniform, whether it's military or police, comes with responsibility. The responsibility to treat people fairly, to tell the truth, to use power to protect, not to harm. Some people forget that. But the ones who remember it, who live by it, those are the real heroes." The applause was thunderous. James stood with everyone else, clapping for his daughter, overwhelmed with pride. Linda was crying beside him, happy tears streaming down her face. After the assembly, several parents approached James to shake his hand and thank him for his service. Not just his military service, but for standing up against injustice. A few shared their own stories of unfair treatment by police. One father, a black man about James's age, just gripped his hand and said, "Thank you for fighting, for all of us." On the drive home, Nicole asked, "Dad, are you going to take that new job General Foster offered?" James glanced at her in the rearview mirror. "How did you know about that?" "I heard you talking to Mom about it yesterday." "Are you?" I don't know yet. It's a big decision. I think you should, Nicole said firmly. You always tell me that when we have the power to help people, we have the responsibility to do it. You have that power now. Linda reached over and squeezed James's hand. She's right, you know. You didn't ask for any of this, but now that it's happened, you can either let it be just something that happened to you, or you can make it mean something. That night, after Nicole had gone to bed, James sat at the kitchen table with the folder General Foster had given him. He read through the job description, the responsibilities, the scope of the work. It was daunting. It would mean travel, difficult conversations, confronting systemic problems that didn't have easy solutions. But it was also an opportunity to make sure that what happened to him happened to fewer people in the future. To train officers to see beyond their biases, to help military personnel understand their rights, to build bridges between communities and law enforcement. He thought about Officer Hastings, who had resigned from the police force 2 days after the trial, rather than face the internal investigation. The district attorney had declined to press criminal charges, citing insufficient evidence of intent, a decision that had angered many but surprised no one. The system protecting its own even when the evidence was overwhelming, but change was happening, however slowly. The police department had announced new training requirements on implicit bias and de-escalation. The prosecutor's office had hired a new supervisor specifically to review cases for potential misconduct. It wasn't enough, but it was a start. James picked up a pen and began drafting his acceptance letter for the new position. Linda came up behind him and wrapped her arms around his shoulders. "You're sure about this?" she asked. "No," James admitted, "but I'm sure that I have to try. For every person sitting in a courtroom right now without a general to save them, for every person who got pulled over for driving while black and never got justice, for every kid like Nicole who needs to see that standing up for what's right actually matters." "Then I'm with you," Linda said simply. "Whatever you need, we're with you." James finished the letter and set down his pen. Tomorrow he'd email it to General Foster. Tomorrow he'd start this new chapter of his life. But tonight he sat with his wife in the quiet kitchen of their home, grateful for the simple blessing of being free, being believed, and being given the chance to turn injustice into impact. The doorbell rang unexpectedly. James checked his watch, nearly 10 p.m. Who would visit this late? He opened the door to find Captain Henderson standing there with an apologetic expression.